We can hear you well.
Thank you. Thanks, John. I've lost my Zoom controls to share my screen. It's not a good start, but let's try again. Okay, this time. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see Tableau.
Good. That's what we're here for. So as Alex said, we haven't run in-person user groups for quite some time, especially in Christchurch, and maybe not for a year in Auckland. So what I've done is put through sort of a list of some of the main desktop features that I've picked out from various releases over the last year or so, and just going to highlight a few of them here. Of course, there's plenty in each release that might be more specific to your role around IT server management, for example, or administration of your cloud service, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to go into any of that. I'm just going to focus on Tableau Desktop for today, and just walk through and sort of show you a few different things from different releases. Also understanding that not many organizations will be on the most recent release, and that's generally because if you're using Tableau Server, for example, and your IT team might not want you on your latest release, they prefer to be maybe a version behind, that sort of thing. So I've picked a couple of things from each release, and hopefully you know which version you're on at the moment, or perhaps the version that you're aiming to move to if you see something that might be really useful to your analytics. So the first thing I wanted to cover off, and I couldn't find which version this was. I think we all will know the desktop pane if you've been working away in desktop and you've favorited some and pinned some favorite workbooks, for example, or want to open a recently used workbook. Previously, when you upgrade Tableau Desktop, you would then open your fresh, clean, latest version and have nothing to show in your history or in your pinned workbooks. So, as I said, I can't find exactly which version this relates to, but certainly more recently, as you upgrade Tableau Desktop to a more recent version, it remembers your pinned content and recent workbooks. So that's something that's quite nice, especially if you've got a few go-tos that you like to keep tabs on. So if we start in 2021.1, so that's obviously the first release of last year. Each page in here is a web page. So Tableau actually has a full breakdown of everything that's released in each version. So it's easy enough to follow along with that naming convention there, and essentially look at more detail in every release. And so the headline elements of 21.1 were mostly around the Salesforce acquisition of Tableau and sort of integrating what was then Einstein Analytics with Tableau. I think it's now called CRM Analytics. And so there's lots of feature functions there. So if you're a Salesforce Einstein user and a Tableau user, there's some really interesting integration that starts to take place as early as last year. For the rest of us, if we're not using Salesforce, I want to show you quick LODs. It can be really nice to create a quick LOD. And there's also starts to bring in a few other bits and pieces around extensions to extend your work in Tableau Desktop. So the first one is quick LOD calcs. And so if not everyone is familiar with level of detail calcs, they're really useful for a problem such as calculating a percentage of total within your data set. So in this example here, using our Superstore data, we can see that we've got sum of sales per subcategory for each of the regions. So we've got central, north, and southern regions. And so if we wanted to total sales for the central region, we would need to write a fixed LOD to say that we want the sum of sales fixed at the region level. And so what quick LODs allows us to do is to take our measure. So in this case, we want sales, and we can control click or command click on a Mac, and we can drag that over the dimension that we want to use, and that just straight away creates a quick LOD for us. And so if I go into edit this calc, you can see that that's the syntax of an LOD, and it just saves a bit of typing. And we can bring that through, and then we can see if that's working as expected. And so we now get this fixed sum of sales for the region. And then we can go ahead and and use that in calculations to do something like calculate a percentage of total for each of these subcategories and say, well, what percentage of total was each of these subcategories against that total? So I could do the sum of individual sales against the sum of the regional total and bring that through, for example. And then we essentially are normalizing our data at this point, and we're now, regardless of the sales volume, we're looking at the individual contribution of that subcategory against the total for its region. And you can start to see actually some of the highest contribution is bookcases in the south, for example. And if we went further than that, we've got a calculation that will say, well, colour anything that's above 10%, for example, and we could bring that into colour, and we could really specifically answer for each region which subcategories contributed more than 10% towards the regional total. So quick LODs, the syntax can be a bit quirky with the brackets and things like that. So it's just a really nice way to quickly write fixed LODs and use them in your workbooks. Extensions is another one that was released in 2021.1, and so that's this. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. In the bottom left-hand corner, we get this new extension object that's actually sitting inside Tableau Desktop, and so we can bring that out and basically sift through a lot of different options in here. And so there's a significant amount of functionality that's actually sitting in this extensions tab that could be really useful to you. So I know that, for example, tab CSS, I've seen an example of that recently, and it's to help with some formatting of your dashboard objects. Data tables for different options for when you're creating tables in Tableau. And the sort of more fun one that I'm going to use now is this image map filter, and essentially I'll maybe use a retail example again, and so by dragging this extension through, it'll ask me to choose an image to connect to, and if I could remember where I saved it, that would be great. Oops. Thought I had that one ready to go, sorry. I'm going to take just any old image. Sorry, I did have a sort of dummy floor plan of a retail store, but nonetheless, let's assume this is 4 different areas of a retail store. And what we're saying here is that we want, when we take an action on this image, we want to filter by this, take an action on subcategory in our workbook, and we want to affect these other sheets. So when we do that, we can then say, well, this particular quadrant here on our floor plan or on our body, if we're doing physio analysis or something like that, we could say that belongs to accessories. We could say that this one up here in our image, we want that to filter on tables, for example, and you get a few other options, for image types and that sort of thing, and you can keep configuring your image. And then essentially, once you've done that, you can see that on the right-hand side, they're essentially hyperlinks now. So a little sort of hand icon as opposed to just the image itself on the left-hand side with no configuration. And so now when I make a selection on that part of the image, I get actions in my other visualizations. So that's quite a fun one. And so you can see I configure that for tables. And so then we get these 2 visualizations filtered. And if I did the same, I get that for accessories, and I can control click and get multiple categories if I wanted to do that. So there's lots of different extensions, and would encourage you to jump in and have a look at what's available in there. Could make for some interesting analysis on top of some of your default work in Tableau. In 2021.2, so sort of midway through last year, from a licensing perspective, with functionality of Ask Data, and I don't know how many of you use it at the moment, but it used to be only at a license level of Explorer or above. So Tableau opened it up and allowed the viewer license type to be able to use the Ask Data functionality, and that's sort of natural language processing. So the idea is you type a question and Tableau will generate some visualizations for you. And the same for explain data, which is when you select a certain data point, you might want to look at perhaps what are some of the interesting data points that are leading to that point on your analysis. And again, if we jump down into the Tableau web page and filter Tableau desktop just to really look at what we might use. The map layer control is the one I want to show mainly in here, and I'll quickly touch on the area spatial calc as well. And one that Tableau don't actually mention is the ability to show or hide fixed containers. So again, not sure how many of you are using collapsible containers in Tableau to perhaps give your dashboard more space for analysis and less so about things like filter panes and things like that. So what we used to have to float this object first to get the show hide button menu, but we can now do that on fixed containers as well, which is quite nice. And so then we get our image button that we can configure, but essentially we can take an action on that button to then show and hide that container. And you can see that as a user interacts, the idea being that you open up your filter pane, make some selections, and can close that again, and then can focus on the analysis. So show hide fixed containers is now possible. And one of the Iron Viz entries from this year, Kimberly, who's an Australian, used collapsible containers in a really interesting way, which was sort of nested collapsible containers, and that way you had to start at one end and slowly open containers to sort of follow her story, and it was a really clever way of using that function. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. Map layer control, I think is really interesting, and the main reason I like this is because a lot of us are using dual axes charts at the moment to bring in something like a bar chart and overlay logos, for example, or overlay a secondary piece of information that might be useful. But you're limited to 2 layers in that dual axes chart, or if you have a genuine dual axes chart, you then don't have any option to add anything else to that visualization. So map layers does away with the concept of multiple axes or dual axes charts if you want multiple details, and essentially we can just take any information. In this case, it's only in maps, so we can take any geospatial information and bring it into our visualization by dropping it here rather than in the marks card or in the rows or column shelves. So we can add a second layer to this map, and in this case we don't see anything yet. I need to bring in country as well, and then we can start to see, well, where are the provinces within the countries that we sell to, and we can make that a field map as well. And so now we have, the more covered the country is, the more sales we've got, and you can see something like Portugal, there's only a few regions on the coast that contribute to our sales. Ireland is the same, there's only a few provinces that make up their total country's sales. And we can keep going, and we can have multiple layers, and so there's no limit to how many layers you can have anymore. So you don't just have to do a dual axis chart, you can have 3 levels of detail, for example. So if I bring in all my cities and color them black just so you can see them, you now see we have these 3 different layers of analysis on our map. And the layer control is not just the fact that you can layer in the first place, it's then you get this little nice interface to say, well, here's all the layers that I've created, but I perhaps don't want to see my provinces, I just want to see country and city. And so you just get this ability to nicely toggle between the layers that are displaying on that map. And so again, that can be a really fast way to sort of add multiple levels of detail to, at the moment, your geospatial analysis, and let the end user toggle a bit more about exactly what they want to see. And just a nice way to move between your analysis there. And the reason I picked this one is because my understanding is that this concept of layers in visualizations will expand or extend to everything else as well, not just to maps. So you know, there'll be some interesting use cases that we'll see for possibly, you know, just your standard visualization types as well. The area spatial calc is again an interesting one if you're working with shape files. At the moment, if you want to use default shapes in Tableau, Tableau will understand postcodes in New Zealand. It'll understand the shape of New Zealand as a country. It'll understand our regions, so Canterbury, for example, and then it'll understand our postcode shape boundaries, and sort of nothing in between. So if you're using things like census data with statistical area units, or any type of, like even just our traditional districts for councils, which is what I've got here. You need to bring in your own shape files, and I tend to use coordinates to get my shape files. And so it's really easy to bring in a map of New Zealand at the level of detail that you need. And I'll get rid of the area outside of New Zealand. And so then we now have a map of all our council boundaries. And for example, we want to, and this is only really for more when you've got custom shapes, but we might want to know what is the size of our shape and how big is that area compared to others in the country. So we have this new area calc that we can use with shape files. So we specify the shape that we're calculating, and we also specify the units. So in my case, I'm doing kilometers. I'll make it a bit bigger so you can see that. But this area function is new. And give it a calc title. And so you can see then when I drop that into tooltips, we now get the size of that shape. And in this case, we know that it's kilometers, and perhaps I should have called my calculation Komen in brackets, for example. And we can see the size of that shape and just really quickly calculate the size of that shape. And this particular data set actually already has it as part of my data set, which is really handy, but I just thought I'd bring that through as well and give you an idea of sort of the accuracy of the Tableau Calc versus perhaps the default measure that came through with this data set. So you can see it's going to come down to the accuracy of your shape files and exactly how fine those boundaries are. So the larger the shape gets, it does get slightly off, but I think it's extremely close overall. And if I use the little Auckland boundaries as examples, as tested this earlier, you can see they're all absolutely bang on. And so they're just well-defined boundaries for Tableau then to be able to calculate that shape area. So again, another interesting one if you're using shape files of any for any use case, just a nice new calculation for us to use there. If I move to 2021.3, again, lots of non-desktop function released with each release. And again, I'm not going through things like web edit. There's always refinements to web edit when you publish something to server or cloud, and then you want to jump into your workbook online and make some edits. There's always more functionality going into the web edit functionality to match what we can do in desktop already. And things like notifications in Slack, again, that's part of that Salesforce acquisition, given that Salesforce also owns Slack. A non-desktop function or feature that I wanted to quickly mention was personal space. We all love personal space. This is by default, each user gets personal space in their server or Tableau Online / cloud environment. And this is where you can save work in progress or just your own work that you don't necessarily need to publish or share to other users. Previously, without this, you had to get your server admin or your cloud admin to create a space for you or a project with permissions that only you could see, for example. So it was a bit of a pain if you wanted to have this sort of private workspace to do work in progress type work. So this is now a nice sort of space for you to bring your own content through. And that's probably all I really wanted to mention, I think, in 2021.3. Yeah, the custom samples in desktop sounded nice, but I started going down that process of actually how I might add one to my version of Tableau Desktop, and it gets sort of nested in different repositories and things like that. So it's going to be maybe an enterprise function for if you want default sort of training content to show as people download desktop. It's possible that when they open it, instead of seeing the sample workbooks, we can have custom workbooks available to them. So I can see its use case, and some of you might use that as well. In 21.4, so the last release of last year, again, plenty there and filter to the areas that you're interested in looking at. Surprisingly, I'm excited about copy paste functionality, so I'll show you copy and paste because it was quite a big request for people. If you're constantly doing similar things in desktop, it's just easy to format once and then use many times, obviously. And it's probably about all the way. Oh, and multi-layers and maps, actually, I definitely want to cover that. So if we start with copy and paste, this is as simple as it sounds. You've created your dashboard, your formatting is a lot better than mine is, and let's say this navigation button in the top right hand corner, you're happy that it's by default, right? If you take a navigation button out, every time you want to navigate somewhere, first I'll specify it's floating, I'll bring it out, it's text by default, it's grey by default, so I have to go and edit this button and obviously set where it navigates to, but the rest of it I'd have to say it's an image and then go and find the image, etc., and change all the colors. So now when I do that once, I've got my Control-C, Control-V, and I can replicate that really, really quickly. And all I'd have to do in this case is possibly change where the second button navigates to, or perhaps it's more of a home button, so I might want to change just the image and then navigate. Oh, there's my floor plan. And then navigate back to maybe a home style dashboard. But copy and paste, it works for a lot of dashboard content. So let's say I've got a title here that I've formatted and I want to drop into a different dashboard. You can see just Control-C, Control-V now allows me to do that. So it's something you probably would have hoped to see in Tableau version 2, but we've got it in, at the end of last year, which is really nice. So multi-data source map layers, again, was an enhancement to the concept of map layers. And so previously, the map layers I showed you earlier, that was all from the same data source, whereas now, as of 2021.4, Tableau doesn't require you to blend or join these data sources in any way, which is really nice. It means you can just quickly prototype something and perhaps explore if there's a relationship there that you want to do something else with, but don't necessarily have a relationship between your two data sources. So I picked out some key stadiums in Europe, some football stadiums that where teams play, and sized them by the size of their capacity. That has absolutely nothing to do with my retail business, but my first layer is where are these stadiums, and again, if you think a more business use case might be where are my store locations, or where are my branches, where how do I service these might be distribution centers, etc., etc. You might have that in one data source, and then you've got your actual customer information somewhere else. So data set 1 is my stadium sheet. I can now take a different data set and do what I always did before, which was add my map layers. Oh, excuse me, add my map layers and bring these together. And so by default, whichever dimension or whichever, I guess, geospatial unit you're bringing in most recently will be a top layer. And again, so you've got this wee toggle to move your layers up and down depending on what you want to show at the front and depending on what you want to show behind. So that's just a really quick example that you can now bring together different data sources and overlay them. So I know, for example, I did my own personal analysis on earthquakes. I had just a map of New Zealand that there just said so many earthquakes that my map was fully covered in earthquake dots. And I would have appreciated a second layer that just showed the shape of New Zealand for the people that weren't familiar with what New Zealand looked like. And so, maybe I had the ability to turn on and off all my earthquake dots and actually just see underneath the shape file that I'm overlaying. So, potentially I revisit that workbook and I can now use map layers instead of floating a map of New Zealand and trying to line it up perfectly with my first map.
So can you filter this now, Jeff? Could you tell me what stadiums are in Spain?
Yeah, I can still add filters.
But using
in terms of
sales data source.
So the question is, can I filter across multi-data sources? Probably have to parameterize it. I think would be, I haven't tested that. I think I would need a parameter, a country parameter, which would then apply to both data sets through a calc, is my first guess. I haven't played with a single filter that would act across both data sets. And just a quick example of an online feature that I think is interesting is the ability to edit our data sources in the web. So again, if you've published a data source and you want to quickly add a relationship or make a change to your data source, that's now available in browser again for Tableau Cloud or Server. So that can be quite a nice one too. Previously, you'd have to download your data source, make some changes and republish it. So just a nice extra function in the browser, so just to speed things up again. And if we have a quick look at a couple of things that have been released in this year. The Workbook Optimizer is the idea there is that it helps you identify poor performance or slow performance on your workbooks if you have particularly slow workbooks, either for yourself or for your end users. And if I jump down into some of the features of 2022.1, probably the optimizer and this data model swapping root tables, I think is quite an interesting one as well. So if we look at the Workbook Optimizer, essentially, I need to move my menu. Hopefully it doesn't get in the way of everyone else. So we have this option here in server, so I'll just hide everything so that we've got a clean slate. And so here we get this, under the server menu, we get this option here to run an optimizer. And so that's going to have a quick look at your workbook and tell you things that you've done well or optimally, some things that you could improve performance, and then possibly something that might take will make the most effect if you made some improvements here that you get a decent improvement in your workbook experience in terms of load times or performance. So for me, in my workbook that I'm using now, it's just identifying a whole bunch of unused fields, and perhaps that I could hide a lot of those before I publish this workbook, just to reduce some of the load off this as it loads in server or online. And then again, you get a couple of improvements or suggestions. So one being that I've got 20 tabs or sheets in this workbook, and we've probably all had this where you just keep adding more and more sheets to your workbook, and perhaps arguably you should split those out and have more dedicated sort of smaller workbooks at targeted activities, rather than just keep expanding out and just having a gigantic workbook trying to cover everything all at once. So the Workbook Optimizer, again, just to give you a really good idea of perhaps ways that you can improve performance of your workbook. And just wanted to show, the Tableau website, the help documentation is always really solid around these features. And there's lots of, basically the particular article that talks about the optimizer goes through everything that Tableau looks at, and then tells you, a more optimal approach to what you're doing or what it's identified. So it really is quite significant in terms of, how you can produce more optimal workbooks for performance. And then just really quickly, this the data model changes is if you've started to build a data model and you've realized actually you wanted to baseline it off, in this case, your customers rather than your line items. We can now jump into our data source, into our data model, and you can see here that I've created this model starting with people and then looking at orders, and added this date table sort of later on in the piece. Whereas perhaps if we wanted to start with building off dates and join on dates, we can now have this option to swap those around, and Tableau will actually rebuild that model in a way that suits you, and then it just helps you hang extra relationships and joins off that. So that's a nice wee function as well. And lastly, 2022.2, the most recent release. Data Stories is the one that is getting the most attention. I haven't used it yet, and it seems to be an interesting sort of AI. So Tableau bought an AI company probably 3 years ago, maybe. And so the idea is there that you'll essentially get natural language commentary on the visualizations that we're creating. So it can sit alongside a scatter plot and talk about potentially why certain elements are outliers or what might be causing that. It'll help you sort of identify top customers and that sort of thing. Auto-save in the browser is going to stop you getting caught out if you're doing some web edit work and forget to hit save. Your workbooks now have an auto-save function, so you don't have to worry so much about that. And the main one I wanted to just quickly show you is this in-product exchange, and I'll finish on that one. So accelerators in 22.2 if you can see this image, you can see that these sample workbooks are now called accelerators rather than sample workbooks. And you get this little option here that says, I want to see more accelerators. And when you hit that more accelerators button within Tableau Desktop, you'll get essentially this menu within Tableau Desktop. And these are all pre-built workbooks that you can open and connect to. And the idea is that you're plugging in your data and you're getting, you know, maybe 3/4 of the way there based on pre-built workbooks. And then it's up to you to then customize that for yourselves. And so you can certainly pick the version that you're working with. Let's say for example, you're a Salesforce user. You know, there's plenty of sample workbooks to connect to. So if you're a not-for-profit, for example, maybe we should put to English as well. But you see there's some non-profit dashboards in here, and there's you know, education, and there's all sorts of different sort of pre-canned workbooks that will hang off your Salesforce data. ServiceNow, so if you use ServiceNow for your ticket system or some part of your workflow, there's some pre-built ServiceNow reporting in here. And then sort of non-dashboard specific, we get different industry verticals and potentially workbooks that might be interesting to you along here. So lots in here again, to probably just go through and explore. And so if you get asked about maybe producing some a dashboard on your website, you know, maybe you jump into the Exchange via that navigation and you have a look at what Tableau or Tableau partners have built around that space, and hopefully it gets you off the ground faster with producing some analytics that would answer that question. So that's all I've got. I know there's quite a bit there, and I've moved relatively quickly. Encourage you to, there's a web link that I can share that just basically summarizes and lists each version, and you can pick the version that you're interested in. Then within that list everything that's new in that release, and you can filter things like desktop or server or cloud, for example, and have a look. But otherwise, hopefully that's a quick run through of just some of the changes that we've seen in the last year or so in desktop. Back to you, Alex.
I think there was a question online.
Yep. So opening for questions. If anyone else online has questions, you can drop it on the chat too. But we got one from Steve. So Steve asked regarding the personal spaces. If a user leaves, is it possible to access and export any of the workbooks they saved to their personal space, or is that all lost? Do you have an idea?
Wouldn't know, sorry. I'll have to come back to you on that one, Steve.
Okay, good. Yeah.
No worries.
Cool. There are no further questions.
Online, yeah.
So thanks for that, Jeff. We just quickly shift things around, so you'll keep hearing me. And Emma, just connecting her laptop. I'll make sure that everybody online can see Emma as well. There we go.
Yep, can see her.
And now if you share your screen, that should work. Can you hear us? Yes.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Can you say something?
Yes, okay. Yes, you can.
Tabata, can you say something?
Yes, can you
Okay,
hear
we
me?
don't.
Yeah,
Are you?
yeah, good, good. Yeah, I can hear you, Alex. Fine.
Is your laptop volume mute?
Oh, yes. I was worried that something would go wrong. Wait.
Okay,
Usually it would change when I turned it
well,
up.
we'll do
right?
that. We'll do that through the laptop. Can you turn your mute your mic? Can you say something again about it?
Yes, I can hear you, but you're very close.
Okay,
to
yes,
the
it's
laptop,
very
right?
faint. So
Yeah.
we'll need to see, but you can hear us, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can see Emma's screen,
You need to put it a little further to the
but
left.
she
the
isn't
right.
yet.
Yeah, there. That's fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I can
work
see
with-
both Emma and the screen now.
I think I should share the screen.
Yeah.
I thought I already was.
Nice. Oh yeah, we can see the screen being shared as well, which is perfect. Yeah, great.
Then over there.
All right. Just trying to make some space. I'm just moving stuff around. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming along. So my name's Emma, and I'll be talking to you today about data visualization for a general audience. So my aim here is really to kind of talk about a concept that's not specific to Tableau, but is something that anyone who makes data visualizations or interacts with data visualizations thinks about. So yeah, these are some ideas that hopefully you can apply in Tableau, outside of Tableau, wherever you happen to do your work. All right, so a little bit about me. I am an actuary, so I work in financial services, mostly in insurance. I do risk analysis for insurance companies. And I also dabble a little bit in data journalism. So, you know, just to have some fun on the side. So a quick story about how I got into that side hobby. So this map might look familiar to you. And basically what happened is sometime in 2021, I actually went homesick from work. And when I was sort of scrolling through Twitter, I came across a map that looked like this, but it was of the US. So it basically showed you how much you needed to earn in each state to afford housing and to, you know, to buy a house in that state. And because I don't know what a sick day is, I was like, all right, I can make this for New Zealand. So I went ahead and did that. So it went viral and was shared, you know, on Twitter, but also on Facebook, on LinkedIn. It ended up on News Hub, and it was shown to the Minister of Housing, which is an interesting thing to have to explain to your boss why you went home sick and ended up on the news. But that's sort of how I got into data journalism, was by kind of coming across this map and thinking, you know, I could make that, and going away and making something similar. So since then, I have written a bunch of different articles for the spin-off. So they approached me after that map went viral and asked me whether I wanted to write about it, and then whether I wanted to keep writing for them. So I've written about everything from how much you need to earn to afford rent, to why, you know, almost no one goes to the dentist regularly, to how far you would have to travel in New Zealand to get an abortion, to truancy, whole wide range of it. So that's kind of my introduction to this. And what I wanted to share with you today was a few things that I've learned along the way as I've been doing this and putting those articles out. So my plan for tonight is to talk about a couple of different principles of data visualization that I think about when I'm putting things together. I feel like principles is quite a big word. It's more like things I've been thinking about recently. And then I wanted to talk about titles. So the titles that we give our visualizations as sort of a case study of those principles. So the first thing that I always ask myself is, who am I actually talking to? And I think that's the question that drives everything else beyond that. So every decision that you make after that should be based on, you know, who are you talking to and how interested are they? How much do they know about the topic already? So obviously it's quite different if you're writing an article for a general audience that's, you know, scrolling on their phone while they're taking the bus to work, versus if you're putting together a visualization for actuaries on how much their bonus will be this year, which that is a presentation we have every year, but I don't make the data viz for it, so that's good. And the second thing I always think about is that actually no one cares about this as much as you do. And I think this is really important to bear in mind when we're talking about a general audience. So by general audience, I mean someone who doesn't know as much as you do and isn't as invested as you are. So that could be, so for me, generally speaking, it's, you know, someone who's reading the news, but it could also be, you know, someone who isn't as experienced in the field that you are. Maybe you're talking to a different team within your work, or you know, whatever the case may be. They don't know as much and they don't care as much. And that's a really important thing to be aware of and keep in mind. So the positive thing about the fact that they don't know as much and they're not as invested is that you actually don't have to come up with a revolutionary idea every single time. So this was a recent data visualization I made about truancy in New Zealand, looking at the rate of absences in schools and comparing that to the number of cases of COVID in term 1 of 2022. And I felt a little bit silly writing the article because it was like, COVID's not great for attendance. You know, it's like, I don't feel like I'm putting out like revolutionary ideas here. And this graph is obviously just a line graph. But I think it resonated with a lot of people because they, you know, they could relate to that. They had children that were sick, or they were sick and their children had to stay home, or whatever the case may be. So I think sometimes we sort of, or at least I kind of, when I'm very in the data, I sort of feel like I have to reinvent the wheel for it to be interesting. And I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves that that's not always the case, and something that is fairly pedestrian to you might actually be quite interesting to someone else. So on the other hand side, there are some negatives to the fact that people don't care as much as you do. And one of them is that people generally don't want to work very hard to understand what you're trying to explain to them. You'll notice that I put someone else's visualization on the con. Don't worry, my own visualizations will be criticized later on. No, but this is a data visualization from the New York Times, which I actually like. And I like all of the visualizations I've put in this presentation, but this is about where people make friends by how much income they have. So it's actually really interesting, but when I first saw this, I found it really hard to get into. And I could sort of feel my brain like, okay, we have to work for this. You know, like I have to spend a minute reading the different parts, and I could feel that resistance. And I think we have to bear in mind that most people, when they look at the things that we make, they're actually not going to go through that and kind of, you know, put the work in and, you know, get to the point where they understand what you're doing. So where at all possible, we should, you know, try and minimize the amount of work that they need to put into it, and also kind of hook them in to incentivize that if possible. So I do want to just go over this visualization because I do think it's cool. So this is basically looking at, so you've got your lower income people and your higher income people, and it shows you where those people tend to meet the friends that they have. So we can see that in college, it's mostly people who are at the higher income who are meeting their friends in college, which makes sense. And then at work, it tends to be sort of flatter. So most people make friends at work, regardless of where they sit on the income scale. Although middle class people do tend to make more friends at work than the two extremes. And there's a whole bunch of other categories that this visualization goes through, and I think it's actually quite cool. But it is a little bit of work. All right, so now I wanted to move on to looking at titles for data visualizations. It's a little bit of a case study. So this is how I think about when I put together a title, which I often spend more time on than, maybe not more time, but I spend a significant amount of time on that compared to the rest of the visualization. And what I try and achieve is sort of a combination of it being interesting, accurate, and understandable, which is quite hard. And I think that if we end up in this quadrant here of interesting and understandable, but not accurate, what we're really doing is marketing. And actuaries hate when someone takes their graph and puts a title on it like that. And I have to have a fight with marketing. On the other hand, if we end up in this quadrant where things are accurate and understandable, but not very interesting, then what we're effectively doing is we're giving an instruction manual for how to make the graph. And I've definitely been guilty of this. And I think in certain cases, if you're talking to an invested, or if you're talking to a technical audience that doesn't really want the fluff, that can be totally fine. But you know, if you're talking to an audience that's not as invested, then this is not how you're going to hook them in. And then finally, I think if we have an interesting and accurate title that isn't really understandable, then I feel like we're in academia, where you're like, oh, that sounds like something I want to know more about, but I don't really know what's going on. So this is an example of what I would call the instruction manual. And shout out to Mark Dolder, love his work. I just don't think the title's doing it justice. This is looking at cumulative rainfall in Nelson, where obviously the flooding has been happening. And what we can see is the orange line, which is the rainfall in 2022, obviously increased massively over a very short period of time, which has been, the last few weeks. So there's nothing wrong with this. But again, I think if you're pitching it towards that general audience, then you're sort of doing yourself a disservice, because you're not really incentivizing people to put the work in. Because I do think this is a chart that takes 30 seconds to kind of, for you to understand, and you need an interesting title to make that happen. For most people, maybe not for some people in this room, but for most people. So this is a visualization I did, which is very much the same thing. I'm basically telling you what I calculated. So I'm telling you, the distance to the closest medical provider. So it's almost like if you want to go and make this map, this is how you do it. And it's not very engaging. So I think, again, we could be, there's a lot of work that's gone into that map, and we're not really selling it to the best of our abilities if we do that instruction manual type thing. So then this is an example of what I would call interesting and accurate but not understandable. So we're sort of heading into that academia territory. So we've got we're looking at the drought in Europe, and we're talking about river discharge anomaly, which again sounds interesting, but I'm not quite sure what that means, and I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at, and so it's sort of missing that kind of understandable component that we're trying to include as well. So this tends to be the way that I approach titles now. So I sort of have my main header, which is what I'm calling the takeaway for everyone. So if I want people to take one thing away from the map or the graph, what is that going to be? Often that's phrased in terms of a question. So sort of a question that I'm sort of encouraging that person to answer by looking at the graph. And then I usually do a subheader, which is, if you're a nerd, if you're, an actuary who's going to ask me exactly what did I do there, then that's included so that you can kind of take that away straight away. So these are not graphs that I made, but they do show that concept. On the left, we've got one that talks about the rating of various chocolate bars. So basically, so the top header is that Bounty and Snickers are the two most controversial candy bars in celebrations. I think that's quite a catchy title. It's interesting. It's also understandable, and I would argue it's accurate as well. And then you can see there's a subheader that basically says we got this data from a Likert scale, and these people were asked, how much do you like this, or whatever it is. So it's giving the information for those that want more details, but it's not leading with that. And I think that's quite a good balance to be striking. The second one is looking at water quality, and it's sort of giving the headline of the water quality in England and Wales is poor compared to Scotland. So that's sort of the overall takeaway that someone can take from this. And then it talks about, how is water quality measured, blah, 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 in the subheading. So these are a few examples of my own visualizations where I've used this kind of technique. The first one on the left is about attendance in New Zealand schools. So it's looking at, whether that's decreased. And then the subheader is about, we're talking about present half days, which is how this is measured. And it's across all students, blah, blah, blah. So you can sort of dig into the details once you're kind of engaged in the visualization as a whole. And then on the right, we've got, we're looking at the effect of interest rate rises and house price rises on that map that I showed you right at the beginning, which is how much do you need to earn to actually be able to afford a house. And so I phrased it as how much of a pay rise did your household need to afford the average house in your region. So from 2021 to 2022, this is how much you would have needed to increase your income to sort of end up at the same position that you were at in 2021. And then you've got, the details of what's the time period I'm looking at, blah, blah, blah. And then you've got below, you've got more details. So that's where like the tier 3 information goes down here. You can see the exact details of what I've done. So that's how I tend to approach things. And those ideas kind of come from those overall questions of who are you talking to and how can you sort of get over, kind of help them over the hump of the work that you need to put in to actually understand a data visualization. All right, and that's me.
Questions? Online? From here, and then we'll go to it.
I think people online are too shy, I think. But if anybody online has a question, please type in now.
Well, you think about the question to ask next, I'll ask one. Do you get a lot of feedback from people who look at your visualization?
Yes. I mean, so I get a lot of feedback on Twitter. I think maybe if I wasn't so active on Twitter, I maybe wouldn't, but I also wouldn't have the maps. They wouldn't have gone anywhere. I think if it's like valid, if someone has like a valid criticism, then obviously you always want to kind of take that on board. And I think that has maybe, that's sort of why I put in those subheadings for those people who are like, okay, but how are you measuring this? That
I think they may be having some problems with the internet down there in Auckland. We can't hear them. But yeah, I think Alex is already looking into it.
That's all right. These are the things that happen, but that was a very good presentation, I thought.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Nah, don't worry about it.
I vote for Emma's Twitter feed though. It's pretty funny. Some of it's about data and data visualization, and you get random insights into different parts of your life.
Yeah. Emma's really active on Twitter, and she's often posting very interesting stuff there as well.
Okay, well, we'll jump off. I don't think there's no other questions for me or Steve. I'll come back to you on your question around whether the server repository or you know, whether those workbooks are recoverable and whether they should be is probably another question, but I'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks, Jeff.
We'll jump off otherwise.
Yes, I think I'd be quite interested in that as well, actually, Jeff, if that's possible. So that was quite a good question by Steve. I wasn't aware that you couldn't get into the workbooks either, so it's very similar in a sense with Power BI, but I'm technically new into Tableau, so it was good to kind of find these things out.
Yeah, sorry, I did make an assumption that people knew Tableau with my one. I just was very
Oh no, yeah, don't worry, Jeff. You as much as I don't know it, it's very intuitive. So that's what I find Tableau as a fascinating tool to utilize. And your presentation with exactly what was coming through and what was new really helps me out know it. So it's been, yeah, it was much appreciated.
Yeah, cool. No worries. I'll drop my workbook onto Tableau Public as well, and everyone can have a look at that if they want to see anything there. And once I get an answer to that question, I'll just drop it at the end of the workbook as well.
Oh, that would be awesome. Thanks.
Cheers, everyone. We'll jump off. Looks like Auckland having their own party now.
I noticed the corona was there, so yeah.
Cheers.
Catch it.
Bye.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Yep, Alex is still trying to sort it out, which is funny because we can still see some. Oh, we can still see them
They
sharing.
asked me, like, can you look into this?
Oh, can hear Emma
So,
now.
yeah, I think there's a little bit of both. It sort of goes both ways.
We can hear Emma now.
Sorry, we just got a question up the front, maybe.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, like about the data accuracy and the data availability. How is it for you to, like, whenever you're creating graph or for the visualization, how readily available the data and accuracy that you get for the visualization?
I think it varies a lot depending on what it is. So, and that's often like a limiting factor. So, you know, I will sort of consider things like Statistics New Zealand or whatever different government agencies are relevant. But yeah, that's often a limiting factor. You can't, you know, it's not granular enough, or the time period's not long enough, or whatever it is. And you sort of have to work around that or accept that you can't do certain things. Yeah, I guess that's just how it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it was me again. Sorry. Tough question. Are you a Tableau user?
No. And I did disclaim this. I did let Alex know.
Okay, blame me.
Yeah.
Do you have a most expensive visualization?
Like how much time I've put into it, or
Like you mentioned geocoding, which
oh
your
yes.
credit card cry quite a bit. if you're like sending a lot of data points, and you do it by hand.
I mean, so that was the this map here. So it was the various medical abortion providers. So I went onto the website and I was like, I think there's 26. And I opened it and I was like, 26. That's really bad. I could geocode this by hand. So, you know, like, would I do it if there were like 100? Probably not, but yeah.
What is your thought process behind building a visualization? So you start with the story, you understand the background, you think of a title and then a visualization according to it, or you really go at like old school, do stuff in Excel, try to find the story behind and then start visualizing it?
So yeah, I think it depends a little bit on the data, but I would usually start with some data, try and pull some kind of interesting trend or story out of that, come up with a visualization. I still usually do the titles at the end, but I do put more thought into them than I used to. And then it's a case of like writing the article, realizing that, you know, you sort of went off on like a side quest a little bit, and potentially doing another visualization if you need it, and then it sort of comes together in that way. Yeah.
Cool. No other questions? No questions online? We briefly dropped out the call, so that was my fault. Sweet. Thanks again. We do have a giveaway for our speakers. Take your time.
Sorry. I'm like, oh.
So if you don't know it, that's a book worth buying. We are here from Chris McDowell and Tim Dini. They created a full book of visualizations and maps of New Zealand from like
Alex, I don't know if you can hear me from there. Can you hear me? Yeah, I cannot hear you anymore. It's just me and Steve here though, so. Well, there is another laptop. What happens if we unmute that one?
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, now I can hear you. With a little echo, but I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh no, a lot of echo. Ooh. Say something. Hey Steve, going through our tech adventures here, trying to sync 3 locations at the same time.
I'm actually amazed how good a job you guys did wrangling all the different locations.
Yeah, no, it went, mostly well. Yeah, as
Yeah.
far as like having 3 different places and, like online and Christchurch and Auckland and all. Yeah.
Great presentations as well. Really appreciate the chance to watch.
Nice, thank you.
Okay.
I
So
can
you
hear you
me
now.
right?
No feedback. Yes, that works.
Yes. Very good. Cool. And I don't want to leave the meeting.
Great.
Okay, cool. So a couple of announcements. Dreamforce, in case you are Salesforce users, even if you're not, happening on the 20th to 22nd of September. Yes, there's a whole lot of Salesforce stuff, but they also have a Tableau track, and there will be some announcement about new features and that sort of thing. So definitely worth keeping an eye out for that, and seeing sort of what sort of tracks and what talks they have there. There is the Tableau Data Fest APEC. It's on the 6th of September online. I think it starts in the morning Singapore hours. That's roughly lunchtime our time, I think. A couple of weeks ago, there's sort of data fests around the world. So you have speakers from Tableau talking about the product, and then you have customer speakers talking about how they do that. They have different tracks and sort of sessions to focus on certain areas of that. And then sort of our bits and bobs. So we obviously started in-person events again. So that means we are looking for speakers because we would like to keep them going. So if you can talk about something like Emma, you don't have to do data journalism. That's enough if you have an audience of 10 rather than 5 million. So that's totally fine, and we wouldn't expect anything more than that. If you can host, if your company can host, even if you think you might be able to host, please get in touch. So Salesforce hosted today. We have been around the banks and AIG and Fonterra and all the other companies. So please, we're looking for places to sort of go around companies and sort of see a bit of a different environment. If you look for a job or if you offer a job, let me know. We can announce that in a forum like that. There is the Auckland Tableau user group on LinkedIn. If you're not a member yet, look for it and join. Feel free to post job ads in there, or if you're looking for a job, that's like people did that in the past, but again, over the last 2 years, that sort of the attendance and the activity dropped quite significantly. The next talk we aim at sort of for November-ish. Again, that depends a bit on locations to find for hosting us and of course speakers. A big thank you to Caroline, who works for Tableau, who helps us in the background organizing all of that. To Tegan, who is over here, who is the Tableau AE, who allowed us to sort of use the Salesforce offices. They sponsor the pizza as well. Thanks to the Loft in Christchurch, where the Christchurch folks were, and to Parallel 22 and Avanti for sponsoring some of the foods and some of the drinks as well. So that sort of keeps the whole show running. And now to the big finale. Oh, I should put it on the different screen. There we go. You have a little bit of time to check if you see your name on the right. And if you're not, shut off. Did everybody see themselves? That's the last chance to shout if you didn't see your name. Okay, cool. Then I'll spin the wheel. And so I have a big bag of goodies here. Oh! So we have a mouse pad, a thermos, and a mug, and the Tableau bag. I also have a bunch of t-shirts here. I won't ruffle them because they're like 10 or so. They're in different sizes, and feel free to take them away before you leave. Do we have
See, this is what makes the online attendees jealous.
So feel free to stick around. There's more beer here. And
Nah, yeah. Luckily, I got some swag at the last APAC one,
Well,
so
Um,
I'm all
for
sorted.
everybody on all
I never
Steve's
get
still
any.
online, so thanks for joining and thanks for sticking around. I think Christchurch dropped off as well. Looks like it.
I think Christchurch dropped. Yeah.
Then with that, thanks for everybody. Thanks for people online, and yeah, as I said, stick around and have a few more beers and a couple more pieces of pizza. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone. Cheers. I'm gonna drop now as well, Alex. So I think you guys are just for the drinks there in person. Have fun.